Sorry, people, a few tech issues there that we're doing. Hopefully that wasn't a little bit too weird for you. So,
two men trying to sort out.
I know, exactly. So good evening. Thought it was time to have a bit of a chat in regards to cash flow. We've got a lot of clients who are talking to us who are a bit nervous about things that I'll discuss shortly. And so I thought I'd bring on a couple of people who can definitely help in that in regards to especially the property investment market. If you've got questions throughout the night, please feel free to throw them into the box, which I apparently believe is sitting underneath both Dean and myself. And so in regards to, I suppose, an introduction, the man sitting next to me is Dean Larritt from Maintain to Profit. And I suppose a bit of history there. My connection to Maintain to Profit is Dean's business partner, I think, set Maintain to Profit up very shortly after I set KPM up, which was around about the GFC. Hopefully this period of cycle we're going through is not going to be quite as cash flow, quite as tight from a cash flow point of view now. And besides that, have dealt with Dean numerous times in regards to rental properties and on personal projects. I remember vividly about a decade ago having a rental property where I thought we would save some money by managing the project ourselves. And it should have been a pretty quick project. We got 8 or 9 weeks in, probably less than halfway through the project, and said this is taking far too long. Called Dean and him and his team, had the whole thing completed in about 3 weeks. Realised that was the way to go, and a few weeks later bought another property. And this one here, a mate of mine who's a property trader had it signed up. I offered him some money to take it off him. Contacted Dean, who I met on site the following day. We did a half an hour walk around the property. Kind of banged our heads together in regards to the best ways to maximise equity gain and both in cash flow on the property. And he got me a quote through the next day, and next time I saw the property, everything was done. So, for those of you especially who are time poor, Dean is definitely a man, and we'll be getting into discussions tonight on renovations and the best way to handle deferred maintenance. The other gentleman you see on screen, you've potentially seen doing webinars with me before, who is Dave Faulkner. You're there, Dave? Thank you. And so, in my opinion, David is the predominant expert in regards to property management. I don't think there's anyone more, passionate about property management in the country. It's a hard job. For those of you who don't know, my wife and I previously owned a property management company. Dean, through his company, deals with a lot of companies and property managers and knows how hard it is as well. David was the mentor we went to personally, who basically kind of helped us kind of how to grow Pedersen's property management. And on top of that, like me, he's passionate about having a beer and watching some cricket, and we've done that a fair bit and discussed the property industry in general many times in the past. What I'm going to do tonight, I suppose, and what the agenda is, obviously we're talking about cost of living is a big thing in the news at the moment, and there's definitely a cash flow squeeze out there for property investors with rising interest rates, the change to the interest deductibility. And so I'll have a quick talk about maybe the mortgage side, because the main ways to improve your cash flow, I suppose, is to reduce expenses. And then we'll be jumping into having a chat with these two guys in regards to maybe ways to increase your income. So in regards to, as I said, questions, throw those in the box basically beneath us, and we'll get into those towards the end of the presentation. So here's Dean. Obviously, kind of, you want to have a quick chat about your background there, Dean?
Yeah, look, thanks for having us along tonight. It's always great to sit and have a bit of a chat about kind of what we do and how we help people. I mean, that's really what we're in business for. So, and to, in turn, make people money. So, I'm a cabinet maker by trade. I've been in the construction industry for nearly 27, 28 years now. So I spent my time as a solid timber craftsman, and then moved into super yacht interiors. So worked on super yacht interiors, and then embarked on a bit of a sales career working with kitchen design and manufacture. So have done a spell in designing kitchens and spaces where they need to fit. And then, spent 7 years in the commercial flooring industry as working for a flooring manufacturer. So we were making in New Zealand, making offshore and bringing and selling into both commercial and retail sectors. So ironically, one of my customers from back then is a very, very good supplier of mine now. So it's you build really solid relationships with those people that you trust. And it's we're actually coming up in a week and a half's time, 10th birthday in the business and Maintain to Profit. So my wife and I, we were in our early to mid 30s at that stage. A couple of very young kids, one and three, and decided to take the leap and brought into the business. So Mark and I have known each other for a long time, probably 17, 18 years, and always knew that we wanted to do something together, and kind of, I'm the practical man. We always joke he's the looks, I'm the brains. But yeah, the two of us combined have just made a really great business, really family orientated, obviously with our ownership across the North Island at the moment. But yeah, it's been a great venture. But look, met lots of people along the way, and really nice. Often we'll sit down and just have a cup of coffee with people. It'll cost you, but you sit down and have a cup of coffee with people and just discuss what they wanted to do, offer some advice. Look, if it goes to business, that's great. But if we've been able to help people along the way, that's even better. So,
and we'll tap into some of Dean's knowledge a little bit later on in regards to renovations. David, you probably, many of you might have heard of him before, but he's had a bit of a recent change. Do you want to?
Handsome man, isn't he?
A great looking man.
Oh.
Do you want to explain to everyone what you do?
I mean, I'm the slide after you, Dean, so we don't have to try too hard on that stage. So that's all good. Yeah. Brilliant. So, Kris, thanks for inviting me. It's always a privilege to have a chat with Kris, and he's an absolutely great guy, and consider him to be a good friend as well. And so my background, I've back to where I started my career. I started my career in property management with Property Brokers in Palmerston North. Back in 2005, would have started as a property manager, and learnt my trade there, and basically found the passion. And through that, I progressed up my career with Property Brokers, went to manage the Palmerston North team. Then they made me the first divisional manager for the company. And then I had this itch that I had to scratch. I went off and started Real IQ, which was a property management training company, and did a bit of consultancy work as well. What I'd noticed in my time at Property Brokers first time round was the lack of training. I'm not saying in Property Brokers, I'm just saying within the industry. You go to conferences and you'd see a lot of property managers would be on their own in a real estate office, maybe struggling a little bit. And that's what motivated me to start Real IQ. I had a very great relationship, still have a close relationship with the Skills Organisation, which is an ITO, an industry training organisation. We were the largest provider of the level 4 qualification, an advocate for getting the industry regulated. And then in October last year, I got a phone call from Tim Morant, who's the founder of Property Brokers. He's no longer, he's the chairman now. He's no longer the CEO. His son, Guy, is the CEO, and asked me to come back. And, well, we decided that, time was right. And we come back. And it's a much bigger beast now than what it was when I first left, which makes me wondering why they want me back, because it's grown so big without me. And, well, here I am. And we've got properties all the way up as far north as Whangarei, all the way down to Southland. I actually think, I could be wrong, but I think we are the third biggest landlord in New Zealand behind Kayangarora and Barfoot and Thompson. Yes, they'll have the likes of Ray Whites and the Harcourts, but they're franchise, which makes us a little bit different. We're family owned, and so we run it from Palmerston North, where we have our head office, have a massive training support. We've got lots of resources, lots of data, and I'll be able to share some insights with you later on tonight, and my own experience of renovations and the mistakes that are made, what we got right, what we didn't get right. I'm sure Dean will be more than happy to critique some of the things that I got wrong and some of the things that I got right. So, yeah, back to you, Kris.
Thank you, David. And as David said, Property Brokers is a pretty sizable company. And so that gives, I enjoy talking to David because, in regards to understanding what kind of is going on with events around the country, I don't think there's many people who have a better understanding. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about cash flow, what you can do there, renovation and maintenance. And I think maintenance is something which a lot of people don't spend enough time at looking at. Sometimes it's the deferred maintenance, which means you have larger periods of vacancy. And it's as much about kind of maximising your occupancy through maximising your income through increasing rents. You also don't want to have periods where you can't get tenants up. So I'm going to give you a quick story on the mortgage side and then throw it over to these guys for the rest of the evening. But I do want to quickly talk about this because there's something like 45% of New Zealand's whole amount of mortgages are coming off in the next 12 months. And they're going to be basically jumping into a much higher interest rate over time. We've obviously come from a very kind of low interest rate environment. And most people don't understand how much has changed in regards to the lending environment. So I'm not going to take too much time on this, but just really quickly, I thought the best way to do it was show a story in regards to kind of where the lending landscape was a couple of years ago and kind of where it is now. And then kind of flow into these guys to talk more about the interesting stuff, which is increasing your income. So if we talk about kind of Joe and Mary back in February 2020, just before the first COVID lockdown, they got $110,000 combined income, a couple of kids, own their personal home with no mortgage, a couple of rental properties with $1 million of debt on it. Their debt's interest only, and they've taken the mortgage out 10 years previous, and they're sitting there on a 1-year interest rate of 3.6%. Now, forget about the way that you as investors look at the cash flow. This is how the banks would have looked at the numbers back there. So they would have taken Joe's net income. Now, this is on a monthly basis. Mary's net monthly income. Back then, the banks were taking, depending on the banks, 75 to 80% of the rent into consideration. So they were sitting there with close to, say, $11,000 of net income. Now, then what they would do is take out the monthly living expenses. And from a mortgage point of view, banks don't actually look at what you're paying. They take the debt amount and they put it through a test rate. So back then, the test rates were around 6.65%. And it doesn't matter whether you're interest only or P&I, they always test you on a P&I basis. So you can see net income minus expenses, and you've effectively got a surplus basically at the end of it. So they're in an okay position from a banking point of view. Now, we move forward to roughly around this time last year, and because of COVID, and I won't get too much into these factors, what basically happened is interest rates went through the floor. We've obviously got a very tight job market because we weren't able to have people coming into the country. So Joe and Mary are feeling pretty happy because their incomes have gone up. Their cost of debt went down. Most of you will probably remember having fixed interest rates down around the low 2% area. So they kind of went out into the market and bought another property. And they managed to basically buy this for $500,000. They borrowed the whole amount of money, and let's say this rents out for $400,000. That's right, $400 per week. So from a cash flow point of view, again, the cash flow is looking pretty good. They've got the aforementioned pay increases. They've got a bit more rental income coming in. And also what happened is that test rate I referred to before has dropped because the underlying interest rates decreased. So overall, the banks are saying, okay, these clients are still pretty good. Joe and Mary are feeling pretty good about their situation overall. Now, what's happened since then? Okay, Joe and Mary's incomes have gone up again, the reasons I mentioned before. Unfortunately, though, now what's happening is interest rates are moving up rapidly. And what we're seeing with a lot of clients is that, okay, interest rates have jumped. We know that this current government has basically removing interest deductibility on existing properties, which is going to mean that people are going to feel the cash flow pinch. So a lot of people we're seeing are going to want to retain interest only. And the difference that's coming now, which wasn't there previously, is banks are making clients completely reapply, and they have to meet current lending criteria. What I mean by that is they're going to put you through a full application process, and if you don't meet their current criteria, they will decline the interest-only extension, and they will force you onto making principal interest repayments. So Joe and Mary, this is effectively how their situation looks now. As I mentioned before, their incomes have gone up, but because of changes to the interest deductibility, the bank's actually scaling the rents a little bit lower. Now, the big number I want you to look at is down the bottom there is that test rate. So you'll see that on the mortgages, the test rate is now 7.95%. So this particular client, their interest rate may not have expired yet, but the banks are going to test all of their existing debt on an interest rate of 7.95, which basically means that according to the bank, this client doesn't meet affordability. So Joe and Mary, they might be feeling okay, but according to the bank, they're not meeting criteria anymore. They will not roll the interest only period. So that's going to mean that they're going to suddenly experience a very kind of large cost increase when they move, your interest rate moves up and they move from interest only to principal and interest. So just want to say this really quickly, review your current borrowing. We're already getting quite a few calls from concerned clients going, we did not see this coming. Make sure your position is stress tested, both in regards to your own budget and also, it's worth understanding if you're going to pass the bankers as well. Interest rates, it's worth you checking if you're still on these low interest rates that we've experienced over the last couple of years. Most of you will have had relatively short fixed periods. Can you afford these big jumps? Loan terms, we're doing certain things. We're extending loan terms out to basically improve bank affordability. That reduces cash flow pressure, and interest only. If you're sitting there on interest only, you need to understand the difference between interest only and principal payments. If you don't, basically you need to review. So now basically on to talking to these two guys more in regards to the fun stuff, how to increase income. So David, in regards to rental market analysis, talk me through these particular things here.
Okay, right. So what we have seen in recent times, if we go back and have a look at MBIE data, they collect data. When I say MBIE, that's basically tenancy services. They collect data from all the bonds which get lodged. And this is where they get the market rent from, which you'll see on the tenancy services websites. Historically, it goes back to 1993, so I don't see much point in taking a graph all the way back to 1993. But what I will tell you is this, is that the rental will increase per annum for New Zealand between 4 to 5%, right? That's what has typically happened. It has changed now roughly from really when this government has come into play, because of the amount of changes that have made in terms of legislation. And I'm not going to go into the merits of the legislation changes. Some are good, some are not so good. But what it certainly has done, it's put more of a cost onto landlords. And we've seen, and particularly with COVID, when landlords a lot of landlords would have sold their properties with prices going up at such a high rate, and that has led to a further shortage of stock. And particularly in the provinces, more so than the cities, we have seen rents really increase at a much faster rate. And in a number of the provinces, rents have increased double digits, more than 10%, which is quite phenomenal. Not so much in the South Island, though. And this is really around Christchurch. And if you go back to when, just after the earthquake and the rebuild kicked in, yeah, we saw a spike in rents post-earthquake. But once the rebuild kicked in, you'd see that the rents will be controlled. And if we can go, I don't know, do I control the slides here, Chris, or is Ryan controlling the slides? We can go onto the next slide. There you go. So what this graph shows us here is what has happened in certain provincial towns in relation to the cities. And the key one that I want you to look at is the orange line, which is Christchurch. And Christchurch rents have been surpassed by, would you believe, places like where I am today, Palmerston North, Gisborne. They're now more expensive to rent than Christchurch. Now, you have to take into account that there's going to be different types of properties. And if you go into Wellington Central, the market is made up of predominantly 1-2 bedroom apartments. But the point being is that what we've seen is particularly from the lockdown onwards, is that provincial rents in New Zealand have really increased and caught up with the major centres. Auckland and Wellington still the more expensive places to live. But if you go across onto the next slide, you'll see what I mean with how the median changes of rent. So you're looking at Gisborne there in December 2019. $350 was the median rent. I think this is for May. December 2019. And then you go across to December 2021, you can see the increase, an increase of $123. Where you compare cities like Auckland, you've only seen a $50 increase, right, over that same period of time. So Horowhenua, Levin, up 40% over a 2-year period. Palmerston North, up 25% over a 2-year period. These changes have been dramatic. Yes, we've seen a steady increase in Auckland and Wellington, but more or less in line with historical information of what we see that comes through. So the provinces have seen big changes in rents. If we go on to the next slide, you can give you an indication why. And I've only just picked on on Wellington for this. But if you go around and have a look at some of the other regions, you'll see that for the first time, we have seen a reduction in bonds. What does that mean? So what we've done here, I've taken lodged bonds against closed bonds, and basically just taken them. It gives you your net increase or your net decrease. Now, particularly in October, November, September last year, we saw a lot of rental properties sell. And just give you an indication, for property brokers, so about roughly what happens is you see churn of about 20% of your clients. Now, the vast majority of that churn was landlords selling. The vast majority, right? And so a lot of companies would have seen their rent rolls go backwards because landlords have decided, here's a great time. The property prices are really high. We've got all this compliance. We've got this interest deductibility. We're not going to be able to offset the interest. What do? Let's cash in. Let's sell. And that has led to further reduction in stock. So here you can see for the first time in its history, Wellington has lost rental properties. It's gone backwards. I haven't got slides to show you this, but places like Gisborne, Napier, for 5 years they've been losing rental properties, and this is what has driven up rent prices. So I don't see what we're seeing in the market now. We're starting to see some rental properties go on the market for sale, but they've come back because landlords they've missed the boat. The first home buyers, there's not as many first home buyers there because I think they're probably impacted more by this triple CFA. Chris will be able to confirm that. But we've seen some properties come back from sales onto the rental pool. So for the first time in a long time, we're actually starting to see stock meet the demand. Supply is meeting demand. In the past, demand has well outstripped supply. So I still anticipate rents will increase, but more in line with what they've done historically, around that 4%. And that's the rental update from me.
Thanks, David. I suppose quick question on that. If you're sitting there and you've got rental property, now this has been a very generic question. We don't have time to get into a province by province update. But if you were sitting there generically and going, you're provincial New Zealand, you've owned rental properties, and if you have only raised rents, for example, by 10% in the last year or two, it's fair to say that you probably haven't risen by enough, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's probably a classic mistake we see from many landlords is that they don't want to put the rents up. They've got a good tenant in place. I get that. But it's more incremental, keep up to, because even if the tenant leaves or if the tenant may grumble about the rents going up, where are they going to go? Because if they move, they've got to go into somewhere much more expensive. So it's always been my advice is often, within the regulations of the Residential Tenancies Act, often rent increases every year. Review your rents, and looking at what's happening in the marketplace.
And I can definitely reiterate that as well from sitting on my side of the desk, dealing with investors all day, every day. Something we see a lot of is exactly what David says, is that you see people who have a good relationship with their tenant, they end up under-renting the property, they're not getting enough income in, which means they don't often maintain the property well enough because the relationship's good. So the property becomes a little bit dilapidated, and then maybe the tenant moves out. The property there, they suddenly then have to spend quite a bit of money actually getting it up to basically a market standard, and at that stage they may not have the cash flow to do so.
Yeah.
So a bit of a quick building chat, Dean. So I suppose a couple of questions here. So something we're getting asked a lot is, I suppose, all over the news, we've had questions in regards to building materials going through the roof. Yeah. I've definitely heard a little bit lately that because of that, clients are saying, okay, we almost want the market to calm down. Mm-hmm. I have seen some data that said, like there was an ANZ Business Outlook construction survey that said that there's going to be something like 38% drop in residential building plans over the next 12 months. Quite a few builders have already stated that new building inquiries have come back 70 to 80%. If you're sitting there and you're talking to someone who's wanting to do a renovation, a new house build, anything like that, so do you think they're better to sit there and wait and costs are going to come down, or how do you see that part of the market playing out?
Yeah, look, Chris, you're right. In with the increases, with the drop-off in the new home build market. We've been speaking to some of the new housing companies, some of their inquiry levels like 75% down. And it is generated largely by, obviously, media, number one, and which puts a bit of a scare behind things. And then just being unsure, really, about what's going on. What I will say is prices won't come back. I don't expect them to come back anytime soon. What needs to happen in the building industry is things to stabilise. Like steel, for instance, in the last 2 years has had like a 60% increase in steel costs. So it's huge. But, it's that old saying, when's the right time to get into property? Well, now's the right time. When's the right time to be, if you've got the cash flow and you've got the resource to do it now. And just plan and do it well and make sure you've got all your ducks in a row and get things underway.
Fantastic. And I think you mentioned the term media before, and media's always good at pumping property and always good at dumping property. And we're going through the dumping stage, I suppose, a bit at the moment. And something which does happen just naturally with property cycles is, but it's an unfortunate part of the New Zealand way that things have, I suppose, have unfortunately eventuated, is that we do tend to have pretty wide-scale failure in regards to certain parts of the construction cycle when we go through a downturn. It happened, to a pretty large extent on the GFC. I've seen that there was a pretty large company, I think they fell over in Wellington a few weeks ago, and I think they had something like 320 trade creditors off the back of that. And so unfortunately you have these failures happen, a lot of small guys get hurt. I think I saw another article that there'd been 92 companies connected to construction and automotive this year, and things connected to the construction industry were making up roughly about 25% of all current business failures in New Zealand. And so if you're talking to kind of investors, obviously some people get a bit gun shy, and it's if you're sitting there going, okay, what's the questions they should be asking to keep themselves safe? If they're looking to renovate, if they're looking to spend some money on the property, to make sure that they don't get caught out by putting cash into something and not getting the end result thereafter.
Yeah, look, Kris, I think we spoke about this the other day. It's like when you're buying a house and you do your due diligence when you buy a house. When you're buying another investment property, do your due diligence. Ask for, don't be afraid to ask for references on work that they've done before. Speak to the references. It's all very well asking for them and actually speak to them. Ask to see photos of what they've done, that's similar to what you're trying to achieve with your investment property, and really get into that side of things. Look, I feel for some of these companies out there. Some of them have been really, the material delays and things like that have really hurt these businesses. They can have multiple new builds or multiple projects on the go at any one time and have subsequently fallen over because of material delays. Some of it's, companies that are smaller and or fresher in the market and have probably, not had the experience of coming into something like this and really steering your business, or, not having somebody like David in your court that can help you in business. So, look, I feel for these guys. Nobody goes into business to want to fail. So it's as an investor and you're wanting to renovate, or you're wanting to, to maintain or do those things around the property to increase your cash flow, just do your homework. We've always said it doesn't matter who you use. Do your homework, ask the right questions. Don't be afraid to ask for references. If people are gun shy about giving that to you, then you're dealing with the wrong company. So time in the market too. Ask how long they've been around. That's nothing against the people that are in business that have been doing it for 2 or 3 years. And there's some great companies out there, but time in the market equals experience, and what you would expect is longevity in the market as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I mean, you can't sit there and go, okay, longevity is the be all and end all. But I know from going through the GFC myself in 2008, 2009, that was an experience. It was my first time going through a recession. You learn more lessons going through a recession than you do going through basically an upwards part of a cycle. And I would say, you're talking about kind of KPM and stuff like that, and our overall financial and business interest. I mean, I've been planning for kind of this kind of recession for years. You go through one hard time like that, and you make sure that you're in a good position to go through the next one. And so I do think kind of longevity and stuff like that, people have gone through it before, and generally better maybe equipped than, unfortunately, people it's their first time at the rodeo. So let's have a look at a couple of properties, and we'll go through some stuff, and we're going to have a bit of a talk about a couple of transactions Dean's been involved in, and then kind of get into one that David's done himself, and I'll get you guys to have a bit of a talk in regards to all the deals between us, because we can all contribute. So this is actually a property of mine. We got Dean in to renovate this one a little while ago. Apologies, I couldn't really kind of come up with any better photos, but it was a real quick kind of cosmetic reno before we moved out. The top photos giving you a bit of an idea about kind of how grotty the carpet had got. The curtains were rubbish, and the bottom is probably more a nice quick clean up that Dean had done. And you can kind of see here the top photo, similar situation. We had two-tone walls. The reason there's rugs all over the floor there were a combination of, I've got 4 kids who managed to trash things and get to do the same job. And the kind of the bottom is basically kind of after things have been done. And so don't underestimate, quite often for a relatively cheap price, you can get a lot of value in doing massive amounts of renovation on those kind of really large surface areas. And you do a fair bit of that type of work.
Oh, look, your brief for this property was, it was going to be rented out. You wanted simplicity, ease of ongoing maintenance. So, really just neutralising the colours, getting a really serviceable floor covering in there. I think through the kitchen space, the beautiful polished timber floors, it was really just lifting that to the market that you wanted to achieve. Look, I think just going through, taking away, we had feature walls in that house, and that one that you can see in the photo wasn't the only one. But just reducing that from a maintenance and having to go back, touch-ups in between tenancies and things like that, just really having that one colour walls made it super user-friendly for you. And, floor coverings, brightening it up, change the curtains in that space as well to the blinds that you can see in that bottom photo. Really just made it super serviceable and commanded the rent that you're now getting for the property.
Yeah, so kind of rough numbers, and this is the big thing which I want to say to people is that sometimes you can spend a little bit, but you're going to get that money back very, very quickly on your cash flow return. And so that situation there, we spent 45k. It wasn't a major renov by basically kind of any means, and we got back about $150 a week increase at the end of it. So you annualise that, we're getting 7,800 back from an increase point of view. If we 100% borrowed basically the money that was going to cost us $1,800, so that's $6,000 effectively back in our pockets for $500 a month. It's worth doing those things. David will talk shortly, I suppose, in regards to some stuff. The other big added benefit is when it comes time to re-tenant properties, by keeping these properties in good condition, you massively reduce the vacancy time as well. And so another property which is a mutual KPM and maintained profit client. As you can see, I always love as an investor these days seeing pink kitchens. Pink kitchens are fantastic because you immediately start thinking about the discount that you can buy the property at.
David, how many of those did you see today, mate? I'm sure at least one.
Geez. Oh, we see plenty. We see plenty. I mean, and listen, while you're talking about this, I mean, this is one of the challenges, one of the major challenges that we have is we operate in some of these small provincial towns where, I mean, talking about, before we came on air, about Taumurunui, for example, where we've got a couple of 100 properties there. And I don't think there's been a new build in Taumurunui for a couple of years. And so we do have an aging rent roll stock, and we have to ensure that we're getting these properties improved over time. But yeah, pink kitchens, absolutely love it. It's an absolute world beater, that one.
And so I suppose kind of jumping onto this one's again kind of predominantly kind of cosmetic renovation. You can kind of see here before and after. Similar situation here, obviously removing pink and going neutral. I think kind of seems to be, and obviously modernising. And I love the green bathtub. You've got to love a house which has got a kind of...
People pay good money for that.
The pink kitchen and the green bathtub are fantastic. I mean, it's kind of similar to, in a few years, those feature walls that you see in some houses might come across the same way.
Yeah, the mirrors off the wall weren't at the start of the demolition for the rental.
Yeah.
It was lived in space. So
yeah. And so, I mean, this is the classic case. This client was more focused on equity gain than the cash flow side, and they ended up, and you can tell from the where the property started from where it finished. So they ended up being that $85,000 renovation in total. The income increase was actually kind of similar to mine, or it was ended up being actually around $150 a week there as well. So it ended up being about a $300 a month increase. But I'll use the analogy I used before, and David, feel free to jump in as well. Can you? How hard I mean, this is on the North Shore of Auckland. Would you want to take that property to market to rent, David, in its before state?
Well, it's going to be a challenge, and the other thing is the quality, and you know, you've got to be careful not to label everybody with a brush. But I think that the odds of getting a higher quality tenant for the photograph on the right compared to the photograph of the left, and better tenants, better property, it's easier to manage that process.
So you've got a quick kind of $300 a month in cash flow, but you're also putting yourself into a much safer position if your tenant moves out. You're going to massively shorten your vacancy time. You want to talk us through how this project went?
yeah, look, this project and like all of the projects I do with this client, our mutual client, you know, the MO is the same. You know, picture on the left, we're in the property after unconditional, before settlement. We're planning the entire thing out. Key here is be ready to hit the ground running when tenant exits the property, or previous owner exits the property. So becomes vacant, and literally the next day we're into it. So that's real key, as you'll all know, experienced in what you do. It is just the least amount of time that it's not doing anything. It's all impact in the pocket. So look, there was a strict time frame. This client, she always works on that time frame, and it's around, you know, what comes in then has to go out before more stuff comes in. So in terms of dollars, so we work to a kind of a 1 month turnaround on these properties,
right.
Sort of 4 to 5 weeks, and that's really top to bottom. Now, everyone, there's a lot of people who say, how do you do that? Or there's a lot of people that are very experienced and you know how to do that. It just takes planning. So in that downtime, it's executing all of that, documenting all of that, having it all planned out and executing well. Of course, look, renovating is renovating. You're going to have hurdles, and you do come across those. It's understanding where they are. Wet areas, huge area of concern, particularly around showers. I don't know, you know, for those of you at home, if you've renovated lately and you've ripped apart an old building, there's always a surprise. There's always something where the shower was, even if it was just a tiny leak, but it's been going for 10 years. There's always something little. Excuse me. Seldom do we pull out bathrooms that are old and need some TLC where there's not something that's been going on in the past. So it's knowing where they come up and being ready for them when they do come up. So, you know, like I said, this is 1 month, sort of between 4 and 5 weeks, being realistic with timeframes as well. And don't, you know, there's stuff on the market that you can buy that of course we can get cheap and things like that. But look, you're in the rental market, David, you'll know this exceptionally well. And we talked about your property. You put in good brands, buy stuff that you know that you can get parts for. So you're not paying somebody to come in and rip out a shower mixture, which is too late, it's stuck behind your shower. Buy stuff that's easy to get replacement parts for, particularly around tapware, you know, vanities, appliances, all of those things that just help you again with reducing that ongoing cost and things like that with the renovation.
Yeah, and you want ideally both, I suppose, property managers and people who are very experienced in renovations will be able to kind of tell you how you maximise this whole project as well. I vividly remember when we had a property management company having people who would own properties in very different areas. One particular kind, as an example, who had the majority of their properties in quite low socioeconomic areas, so that they managed all their renovations themselves, and so their go-to was to do very, very really basic kind of renovations. Then they bought a rental in a pretty nice suburb, and we end up having these situations that they refused to put a dishwasher and refused to put a waste disposal in, and they were kind of wondering why it was kind of hard to basically turn their property. And that might sound really basic. Having good advisors around you can basically tell you, okay, certain areas, okay, you don't actually maybe need to go this far. Putting the top of the line kitchen in the suburb is not going to get you additional renters. You're just going to end up paying more in maintenance versus the suburb here. You might want to go a bit further to increase your occupancy and stuff like that. But would you kind of agree with that, both of you guys?
100%. I mean, all day, every day, we wear two different hats, and I've talked about this with you before. Yeah. We wear an investor's hat and we wear a homeowner's hat. And when we've got the investor's hat on, we're talking to people that are doing exactly this, and they're like, "Oh, what it is, don't spend the money."
Yeah.
What's gonna get you? Sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah. My point here, which I wanted to just interject what Kris says and just reinforce what Kris says, is sometimes some of the biggest mistakes you see people make, they get almost like in a bit of an emotional attachment or whatever it may be. You've got to really look at your property analytically and critically, and don't look for what's right with the property. Look for what's wrong, and then eliminate those faults. And I always liked to, when I first started, I got taught, pretend that you're a solo parent with a 2-year-old kid, and would you rent out this house? And the wider the market you can market that property to, the better it is, and the more likely you're going to get a quick tenant. Dean, I've got a question for you, mate, before we have a look at my example. So when you do these things, you be providing a quote beforehand. What happens when you do rip out? Because this is exactly what happened to me. We ripped out the hot water cylinder, and we found it been leaking for God knows how many years. So how do you approach that with the consumer? Because obviously you've got to go back and readjust the quote.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, we go through the entire process. We split it all out through to your different trades. You get a fixed price for your renovation. Yes, there are things that come up. Are you talking about a hot water cylinder? Those are all things that we look at in the going through, and we're doing this initial scoping of work. I've got key guys that have worked for me for 10 plus years. Obviously, they've been some of them older in the business when Mark had originally started the company. So, knowing what we're doing, and we're having I'll have the experience that I'm not a plumber. I'm a cabinet maker by trade. Yes, I've got construction experience, but I'll draw on my experience of my team, my plumber, my electrician, and have those guys with us. What do? We look at switchboards. Number one, you look at the electrician will go straight to the switchboard. The plumber will go straight to the hot water cylinder. Are there going to be any issues in here? The only thing, and we're open about it with our customers, we can't price or deal with what you can't see.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, David, obviously we're ripping out a shower, or we're pulling out a hot water cylinder. Oh, look, it's completely destroyed the floor. A process of, if owners are around, then great. We go through that with them on site. Or it's documented with photos. Here it is. Here's an estimate, which comes out as a variation to the original contract to deal with what that is. Look, and smart ownership out there. Smart owners will know. Look, here's my price. Factor in 5 to 10%. Never, not to say that you're spending it, but always have that buffer. The banks will always tell you to have a buffer. I think the banks are working on that sort of 15% when it comes to a home renovation now. So that's common knowledge and standard practice. Make sure you've got that buffer. If you've got 60 grand to spend, don't blow your 60 grand in the hope that you're not going to spend any more. Be working on that 50 and have a $10,000 buffer. If you don't spend it, great. Or you've got it to put into something, to present the property well from outside, whether that's some planting or whatever, to spruce it up.
And Dean, can I just ask another quick question before we look at my reno? Because one of the things we were concerned about was asbestos. So looking at a bathroom like that, there's every possibility there could be asbestos-contaminated material when you're doing your reno. Do you have precautions around what you're dealing with there?
Yeah, look, again, it's drawing on the experience around you, knowing what to look for. You you can go into a property and you know that areas, you know, David, you've talked about this and back in your Real IQ, and you and I have had discussions about this in the past, but knowing where asbestos might be, lagging around pipes, old sophites and things like that. So if you're working with that sort of stuff, and it's just understanding where it can be and how you need to deal with that. You know, if it's removal and it's less than, you know, a square meterage, that can be carried out by a competent person, but you still need to ask the questions of the right people. Don't be afraid of asbestos. It's not just because you've got it, it doesn't mean the house is doomed. Again, it's another example of you know, the words out there. You know, we've seen the damage that it's done to people in the past, but look, don't be afraid of it. Again, do your due diligence, ask the right questions. You know, these big companies that deal with asbestos all day, every day are super friendly, believe it or not. They will help, and they will advise on what to look for and you know, and what to do if you come across it. So it's just, again, following the right procedures and making sure you tick the boxes.
Okay, good stuff.
Thanks, guys. So, David, talk us through your renovation.
Yeah, so this is our rental, mine and my wife's, and in Palmerston North. We bought this back in 2007, 2008. And for one reason or another, it got to, I think it was around about March, April last year. And this was basically, we were catering into account for the interest deductibility. And in all honesty, I was guilty. We weren't renting it to the level that we probably should have. We knew that we could have got more. We'd had that tenant in the house for about 14 years. And once I saw the interest deductibility thing, we sat down and thought, well, geez, we better get our rents up, because who knows with this government, we may see rent controls going in. We did that, and it created a vacancy. I'm not sure where the tenant actually went. So what we actually did, we went to, I don't know if I can click through. Ryan, can you just click through the bullet points? It's good on you, mate. Thank you. So we went, and when the tenant gave notice, we decided, right, well, let's go and have a look and weigh up our options. We actually got property brokers in, and they gave us the market assessments of 520 to 570,000, and it was rented at $385 a week, built in the 1950s, good, solid, well-built home on a corner section. So we decided what we were going to do, and in the end, me and my wife thought, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we renovate it, and why don't we put some money into it? It'll be a great little exercise. We kind of figured, where do we put our money anyway? If we sell it, what are we going to do with it? We thought this property has performed pretty well for us, but we were fully aware that it was not in a re-rentable condition. It was tired and it needed renovating. So our aim was to get the property renovated for a budget of approximately $60,000. So the project, it took a fair bit longer than what we had anticipated due to issues around COVID, but we gave ourselves a wee bit of a time frame to get this in. Now, what I wanted to talk about here, and Dean raised this, and I'm not saying that we got everything right. We didn't. We made quite a few mistakes, and one of the things that Dean's alluded to was that the lead-in time. We decided once the tenancy became vacant, that what we were going to do. Now, if we were forward thinking, we would have inspected that property a month or so out and said, look, we're going to really need to look at what we're going to do here. And as soon as we knew that the tenant was going, we should have got in there straight away and had a look and got someone, a professional, who can project manage the work in the end. We did it in conjunction with a property manager, and she did a very, very good job, I have to say. But the delay would have led to lost revenue due to vacant property longer than what we anticipated. We did want to get the rent up to $500 a week with that $60,000 investment. On the next slide, you'll see just some of the photographs of the property itself. So if you just click one at a time, Ryan, you'll see these slides. So this was a kitchen. Just go back one slide, please, Ryan. If you can go back one click. And what you can see there where the oven is, that was a hot water cylinder was in there. And what we decided was to rip that out, and that would go with the fridge space. And we decided to go with a gas Rinnai cylinders, and we put that outside so it gave more space. So what as you can see, it's dated. it needed renovating. So keep going, Ryan. And that's the other angle of the kitchen. And if you keep going, this was the living room. You can see the carpets were pretty threadbare. And on to the next one. Yep, this was the laundry. Now, the laundry was huge. And what we ended up doing with the laundry, we changed it into a scullery. So it became both laundry and it was an extension of the kitchen. So if you go onto the budget, we kind of drew up that's the bathroom. Yeah, onto the budget. We did this budget around $63,000 and we wanted to try and keep it on point and work closely with it. We also had to take into account that it had to be Healthy Homes compliant. It didn't have a range hood, so we had to install the range hood. It had an extractor fan, and we'd also put a log burner in the year previously, and we had it insulated on the underfloor and in the ceiling, but it wasn't insulated in the walls. So we didn't budget for anything with the walls. Right? So that was our budget of around $63,000. You can see that there. Okay, on to the next slide.
If I quickly jump in, David.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Having the renovation guy next to me, you would be used to looking at numbers like this all over the place. And I trust me, I know nothing about this. You'll be better at this than me, David. I pass the stuff on to Dean. Is there any kind of things that you sit there and go, okay, there's you do more expenditure, less expenditure? Any kind of key comments out of interest from someone who does this day in and day out?
Yeah, look, from a from a budgeting purpose, this is perfect. This is great. That you'll be surprised about how many people out there don't produce something like this, or just here's my end cap.
Yep.
And as long as it hits that, what happens in between, and it doesn't, they're not too phased about it. But breaking it down like this is extremely kind of, going to another level. Of course, with kitchens comes fixed price. You get your fixed costs with your plumbing. You get your fixed costs with your electrical. They are what they are. You're never going to change those. Same with the bathroom. You're not going to change them. So I guess it's just understanding things that can move in terms of budget. Floor coverings. So obviously you've got your carpet and vinyl up there, $7K. On a cost, at 11% of your total spend. These are your big ticket items. But bearing in mind, you can buy well. You can buy exceptionally well. You can also buy badly and put in the wrong, particularly in an investment property, and put in the wrong type of product. So again, it's just asking the questions, knowing what's out there. Don't be afraid to ask what specials that they can get their hands on and things like that. There's, Godfrey Hirst, Feltex, you hear them on the radio. They're always doing deals. So have a budget in mind. Don't be afraid to find out. Look, if you chop that down by a couple of grand, then great, you're winning. Kitchen, obviously. Don't go over the top. You don't need to. Back in the 10 years ago, you could actually get a kitchen for between 5 and 10 grand. A simple rental kitchen. It just doesn't happen anymore. So with what you're talking about there in that kind of middle of the road, it is what you'd expect to be talking about.
Yep.
Lighting, not going overboard with that. You don't need big fancy light fittings. Go for things that are simple. Everything's recessed LEDs these days, or surface mount LEDs, just for ongoing maintenance and lowering that long-term cost down. So yeah, this is great. We don't see it all the time, but it's fantastic.
Yeah, so what we ended up doing, Dane, as well, I'll just tell you that we kind of went middle of the road with a lot of, and my wife kind of we decided we didn't want to go cheap, but we didn't want to go top range. So we went like mid-level with carpets, and so we knew that we'd get decent quality. As you can see, we had our challenges. This was not part of the renovation plan. And with the property being vacant, and we also got really badly impacted by COVID. So we went into, if you remember, August last year, we went into that lockdown, and that really put a delay on the project. So when we kept turning up, 3 times individuals had decided that they took a liking to our fence. At one stage, the council had called me about it and seeing what could be done. And but anyway, I mean, these are just the things that you have to deal with from time to time. It's a cost of doing business. So we were good that the council actually were able to remove this for us, and the only reason why they said was because it was ever so slightly offensive. And but if someone had just normally tagged it, they wouldn't have done it, and would have been an extra cost for us. The challenges that we faced, well, leaks in the cavities. We say we ripped out the hot water cylinder. We get the call, and yeah, sure enough, there's leaks, there's damage, and so there had to be a little bit more work done there. We did get warned that there was a high probability that the property would need to be rewired, which we didn't budget for. And of course, that had to happen, and we got it rewired. But the great thing about that, it's done, it's safe, it's compliant, and it's not going to be an issue for the foreseeable future. The other thing that we did when we started ripping out the walls, we decided, look, let's insulate. Let's make sure, we want to make sure that our tenants are warm, they're dry, they're safe. I mean, I can't be there running a property management division which has about 6,500 properties nationwide. And I've got to set the bench high myself and lead by example. Working with contractors, getting them to commit to the work, and that was where one of the issues was. And this is why I'm saying, have someone like Dean and his team to just project manage it. In the end, it would have been a real saving for us if we'd done that. And the lockdown really did impact us as well, because it wasn't just the 3 weeks that it cost us in terms of the lockdown that we had. I mean, I know you guys up in Auckland went a hell of a lot longer and a lot harder than what we did down here, but it impacted supply chains, and it took a hell of a lot longer for our shower to arrive, and that caused a big delay in getting the property finished and get it rented. Anyway, you probably want to see what it looked like. So if we get onto the next slide. So on this one, this was the finished product with the kitchen. And the kitchen looked fantastic. One of the things that I'll say, and I have to give credit to my wife for this, because, me, I would have just put in a bog standard cheap Fisher & Paykel. She found a deal, I think it was with Noel Leeming, with Smeg appliances. And it hadn't previously had a dishwasher. So we put the dishwasher in, the oven, and the range hood were all in a package from Smeg. So really top of the range appliances. And I know that that we could have potentially saved a bit of money there, but because the quality was so high, we were able to get it at a discounted rate. And this is one of the things that you have to realize, is that who picks the property? It's typically the female who will pick the property. If there's a family looking. And what matters to the mother? Well, the kitchen, and the bathroom. We had a pretty small bathroom, and we did a good job with the bathroom. I'm sorry I haven't got photos to show you the bathroom, but what we did with the kitchen was absolutely fantastic. And making that laundry into a scullery just extended it even further, and creating the extra space by removing the hot water cylinder where the fridge could go and having gas cylinders outside. Wonderful, wonderful job. We could have spent more money on this property. We actually did in the end. We didn't get the external painting, and we did, and we will need to do that at some point. The other thing that I did look at potentially doing, and we may still look at doing it, is having a deck built onto the main living room, so it creates an outdoor-indoor flow. But as we've got to remind ourselves, this isn't a property for me to live in. This is a property for tenants to live in, and it's a nice wish for if we have it. And I do believe it will add value. But at this point in time, we just decided that those grand ideas that we had, that we would pull back on. Ryan, can you go back a slide, please? So what we did.
Sorry, while we drop back, and just touching on your comment about things you do differently before, and one of those was the exterior. Thinking about those types of things and what can be done while a tenant's actually in the property, that doesn't affect them living inside the home per se. Exterior painting's not, it doesn't affect a tenant living inside a property. They like it because it's something it's going to present the property well. Things to be mindful of is, if you are going to be painting on the outside, particularly with timber joinery and things like that, is do it in the summertime, because those windows do have to be open when you're painting them. You can't just keep them shut. So in a Palmerston North, I venture to say on a nice, crisp, beautiful, sunny winter's day, it would be bloody freezing. So be mindful about it. But those are things that you can actually carry out while your property's gaining you an income and you've got tenants in the property.
And maximising your cash flow.
25 degrees up here today, mate. It's always a beautiful day in Palmerston North. Anyway, on to what the slide... the slide that I'm showing you here, what we did, and actually we do a fair bit of work with Velocity, and we're actually at Property Brokers, we're trialing an rent valuation with Velocity, who are the data and they do valuations. And what we did, we got them in to just say, we did a whole video tour of the property, and we got Velocity to do a valuation on it. So you can see, I think it was appraised, I think it was about 530 the mid-range, or 540 the mid-range before the renovation. And you can see what it's gone up to there now. Hopefully you can see it clearly on the slide, priced at 665,000. So it increased by, I think it was about 120,000. So if you go along to the budget slide now, please, Ryan, to that one. Yep. This is what we actually spent. Okay. So the kitchen we got from Bunnings, one of these like kit set kitchens, and that was fitted in, and looks fantastic. It really, really does. Looks really good. We put a new garage door on with a remote beforehand. It was just a handle, and the garage goes out onto the main road, so it's good for the tenant. They can just press the button. They're not having to get out of the car to get into the garage. Carpets, we went mid-range on the carpets. Not your cheap, what would typically a lot of people go into a rental. We removed in the bathroom. It was a shower over bath originally. We just got rid of the bath and just went shower, and you know, we thought that looked really good. The painting, if you know, just looking back at things that I could have done differently as well. Our handyman did the painting. Now he wasn't brilliant at decorating, and I may have even considered doing the feature wall as well. I don't know. I'm still on the fence as to whether we would have done that. Right? Of course, the rewiring that we hadn't taken into account. Well, that's what we spent. We spent just under $75,000. The property had increased in value by $125,000. So do the maths. It's a $50,000 increase in your asset value. And yeah, so if we go and have a look at the property in October 2001, so there you can see an increase of 120,000. It took 17 weeks, and that's probably where Dean and from my own experience doing it again, I would have had somebody I could have known and could have trusted to get the job done on time, on spec. And if you can do it in 4 or 5 weeks, you work out how much rent that we missed out on in doing that. So it took 17 weeks. But this is how you've got to look at it. And this is where, again, sometimes I think a lot of landlords make this mistake. They don't look at it as that, oh, I'm spending money on a renovation. It's not spending, it's investing money in your renovation. So you can see what we spent there at $74,000. The rent's actually increased to $530, and I've just done an iRent valuation on this a couple of days ago to see what it should be at now, and it's at $540. That's what the market will tell me. So once we come up for the anniversary, we'll do a small rent increase, not a big rent increase. But you can see there, it's given me an increase per annum return of $7,540 from the investment. That's a 10% gross return. Now, the benefits that we had with this, and I'm aware of how interest deductibility, now, this is where this interest deductibility law is absolute madness, is that if I went to the bank to draw down that money, all that interest that we would have been paying on that, I wouldn't have been able to offset. So it actually disincentivizes landlords from improving the quality of the properties, which is just absolute madness. But yeah, that was our project. It was a lot of good lessons for myself and my wife. We learned a hell of a lot doing it. It's certainly a service that we'd like to potentially introduce into Property Brokers at some stage. We've certainly got the scale and the size to do it. And it's something that I strongly recommend with landlords. I mean, you've got to take into account also, I suspect that we may see changes with some of the things that we're seeing in Europe with energy performance certification. I think you're going to see that come into New Zealand at some point with our focus on heading towards a net carbon zero country by 2050. You've got to think of the carbon footprint from our rental properties and housing in New Zealand. All of this type of stuff you have to take into account planning going forward. Okay?
Yeah.
So, yeah, finally, things that I would have done differently. Paint the exterior at the same time. Professional decorator. done a feature wall. Polyurethane, yep, this is one thing. We found when we ripped up the carpets that this beautiful Remu floorboards, so we may have not even bothered getting carpets in. We probably would have looked at doing polyurethane on the floor instead, and maybe even offer the contractor incentive payments to get the work done on time. But if you're with Dean, you probably don't have to worry about doing that because he will get it done on time. And Fred's door's going out onto a decking into our living room.
Thank you, David.
So that's the renovation.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, that's finishing up, and we'll I can't see, David, if we've got some questions there. Do we have some questions there at all?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. Jason is asking me a question.
Sorry, David, you far away.
Yeah, sorry. So Jason's asking a question. Is it a good time to upgrade home by selling some units and buy a home in good location with big land? I mean, personally, I wouldn't say that I'm overly qualified. I don't know where your location is, things like that. What I will say, though, is that you've just got to understand that there's not many investors in the market at the moment because of the interest deductibility. Now, I suspect that is going to change next year. I suspect we'll have a change of government. They have promised that they would reverse this, so we'll have to wait and see if National will look at that and do that. So, maybe, hang on and see what happens at the election before you decide what to do with those units. And I think,
I'll just jump,
can probably answer the second question.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there for a second. I didn't get the whole question, but I heard big land, and what's effectively happened over the last couple of years. If we go back a couple of years ago, the Reserve Bank dumped the LVRs, and of course interest rates went through the floor, and so a lot of people became quasi land bankers because, especially in Auckland, what we saw, you would have seen in places like South Auckland and stuff like this. South Auckland kind of went up through the roof because people could suddenly get reasonably large land parcels, and they could get them with lower deposit amounts, and because the interest rate was so low, they could land bank and look to develop further on down the track. Since then, what's happened, of course, is the interest rates have gone a lot higher than any of us were thinking just over 12 months ago. And on top of that, as David just mentioned, the deductibility change is a massive cash flow, game changer as well. So while those type of properties went flying up, they're coming flying down. And I was at a box at a sports game at Eden Park a few weeks ago with one of the owners of pretty much the largest real estate branch down there. And he was saying kind of prices in regards to those properties have fallen through the floor. So I kind of agree with what David's saying in regards to the political market. For me, I've got plans to keep an eye on exactly what's happening in the polls. And if it looks like it's a pretty solid change of government, you want to get in there potentially earlier if you're in a good financial position.
Yep.
There's going to be some good buying opportunities with those types of property because the cash flow is so poor on them right at the moment. You ideally want to kind of get in before everyone realises.
Yeah.
So sorry, David, on to the next question.
Yep. So a very good question has just come in. How important is it to have a deck on a rental, and how much will it increase the value by as dollar worth? Oh, geez. I mean, look, you've got to look at modern day living and how people like to live, and about attracting the right type of tenant. And you've just got to weigh up the cost factor in terms of, because the great thing about doing a deck, and you don't need consent, depending on the height of the deck, obviously, but you don't need consent to do it. So Dean would maybe be able to give a better indication of how much it would cost, but it would certainly add value, and it would certainly increase rent, depending on where you are in New Zealand, of course. But maybe by, I don't know, an extra $10 or $20, $25, that would, and then you just work out your return on investment. But the other thing it does, it's going to help you market that property and rent that property a heck of a lot quicker. I mean, Dean, could you give any indication on the cost of building a deck for a standard 3-bedroom, say, 1950s state house?
Look, one of the decks have got interesting over the last particularly 2 years because the other than timber, the next biggest thing that goes into building a deck is fixings, and all of our fixings are made from steel. So with that remarkable 60% increase in steel over the last sort of couple of years, it really has bumped them right up. I was talking to a guy the other day that specialises in doing decks, and you're upwards of $500 a square metre. So they are expensive to build, but you're 100% right. They add capital gain, so property value, but also rent value. If it's there, definitely don't get rid of it. Consider, if it's at low level, consider extending it and things like that. You've already got the bones of and the foundations of the deck. Consider just increasing it if it's a small deck.
You did mine.
Sorry?
You did mine.
We did.
18 months ago, well, no, just before Christmas, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dean got his team in basically over Christmas on my wife's demands, saying it had to be basically available for summer, and yeah.
Yeah. So look, and it's about functionality. If you're building it right and you're doing it to specification, often stainless steel needs to be used in the building of decks. Now, council pretty much specify that you use stainless steel if you are doing it through council. So, look, they are expensive, but I tell you what, Kiwis love to live outside and things like that. So yeah, they are attractive, both rental and on the property market itself.
The other thing I'll just add in there, Dean, as well, is it's so important to maintain these decks as well. Yep. I mean, the amount of rental properties I go around and you see, and the timber's not been treated in years, and it's starting to rot and actually becomes a bit of a health hazard. So, look at the preventative maintenance by keeping sure it's regularly stained every few years.
Yeah, look, and that's the other thing. Like, if people don't mind looking at pine, if you're building a deck out of all of the right stuff, the treated materials. If you don't mind looking at a pine deck, which greys off over time anyway, leave it. It's gonna far outlast a system if it's painted, if it's stained. You've got to remember that staining. If you paint a deck, yes, you've got to keep doing it. That's something you've got to continue to do. It wears off, much like a stain. It's going to wear off as well. So, bearing in mind that if you're building a brand new deck and you want minimal maintenance, minimal ongoing maintenance, other than your regular washing and things like that to keep it up, just let it do its natural thing. They will last a long time. So, just little helpful tips on that side of things too.
Cool.
Excellent.
We'll probably cut it there, but I want to say a big thank you to both you guys. I suppose from the KPM side, we'll flick a email through next couple of days in regards to what I was talking about at the start of the presentation. If any of you want a review to actually understand how you stack up, how you can be improved, we will get that through. In regards to Dean, besides while you are the master franchiser of Main to Profit and your own kind of personally maintain to profit North Shore, you've got franchises on a fair bit around the country now, don't you?
Yeah, we're dotted all over. I guess we've got a fairly good saturation across the North Island now. So down David's neck of the woods, with Maurice down in the Kapiti Coast, beautiful part of the world. We have Randy over in Tauranga, and then we've got Kelly and her husband Shane in Hamilton, and then owners across Auckland. So and all of those have been in business for a fair amount of time now. So I personally still run our flagship franchise area, which is kind of morphed into the North Shore, and been doing that for 10 years now, as I mentioned earlier. So it's exciting and it's fun, and no day's the same, and it's just nice being able to do this, and particularly from the investment side of things, and seeing what people are getting back. So it's great.
So if someone wants to kind of get in contact, what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, best way to contact me. Obviously, we deal with each other regularly, so you've got all my details. But our website, maintaintoprofit.co.nz or renovations.co.nz. You can reach me through there, and as I said earlier, happy to offer advice over a cup of coffee, to steer you in the right direction. And if we can help people along the way, then that's a bonus.
And David, obviously, property brokers. But what was probably with you? It's easier to say what parts of the country you don't cover. That's a short list.
Yeah, it is. We don't cover Auckland. We don't cover Auckland. Yep. We don't cover Wellington. We don't cover Christchurch. We are proudly provincial. We're in a realtors network with the likes of Barfoot's, Tommy's, and Cowdy in Christchurch, and so we're everywhere in between. We've managed about $4 billion worth of real estate nationwide, collecting over $100 million of rent per annum. So it's a big unit. And you can find our details on our website, our brand new website. Just get onto Google, type in property brokers, and we'll pop up, and then be able to come into any of our branches and have a coffee. Or if you want to meet with me over Teams or video, more than happy to do that.
Cool. Well, thank you both, Dean and David, and I hope that was value for all of you listening tonight.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Now, hopefully.